Hey, I'm Rob Ferguson. I'm the head of AI for Microsoft for Startups. In our white paper on how enterprises adapt RAG technology, I learned about this idea of retrieval augmented classification. With just a small amount of data, you can improve classification on really complicated data sets like video. And Cody Coleman, the CEO of Coactive AI, was the one who taught me all about this as a video and AI expert. Hey, Cody, since we spoke, I'd love to hear about how the technology has evolved and how you think it might affect enterprises.
Hey, Rob. That's a great question. It's been a while since we first talked about retrieval augmented classification, and we've seen so much and learned so much in the field. First and foremost, taking a step back, when we think about the goal of retrieval augmented classification, it's really to be able to get that last mile of customization and specificity that enterprises need for downstream use cases, where they want it to be specific and deterministic and tailored to their specific needs and taxonomies. Now, when we first created retrieval augmented classification, we focused on very concrete objects and things like that. For example, think of something like a bird. What we found is that these foundation models, they'll get you 60 to 70% of the way there in terms of accuracy, classification accuracy, or recall. But that last mile, well, there'll be some interesting edge cases where it really kind of depends on the use case. For example, a rotisserie chicken, is that a bird or not a bird? If you're a grocery store, you're going to consider a rotisserie chicken a bird. But if you're creating a nature documentary, well, you definitely want to consider a rotisserie chicken a bird there. So that's where retrieval augmented classification can come in and can help to give you that level of customization and that last mile for your specific use case. And as we found this being used in practice, especially with large media companies, is that people wanted to go beyond the kind of simple, concrete objects like a bird and actually talk about things that are, more abstract and more emotional. So, for example, imagine um, inspiration. Inspiration is something that we can all appreciate and see and feel, but it's really hard to describe, or at least that's what we found in practice. People would type in prompts around inspiration, wanting to be able to kind of classify their content to really focus on what that kind of abstract emotional thing is. But what we found is that you say inspiration just by itself, that's not enough feedback to give to a model to be able to kind of really hone in on the definition that someone has. And at the same time, as human beings, we have a hard time describing, what we mean by inspirational. And that's where one of the key innovations that we found is that we can actually use reasoning models to help bridge that gap where a person like you or I, we can type in inspiration, and then we can actually use a reasoning model to actually expand from that word of inspiration into a bunch of other kind of prompts that capture that. Someone hiking to the top of a mountain, that can capture inspiration. We can use reasoning models to go from that first word to a whole kind of assortment of words for us to kind of flesh that out and further refine and modify to hone in on these kind of more abstract ideas and concepts and ultimately really enable people to do that last mile of customization and even more use cases than ever before.
Yeah, it's like the third wave of artificial intelligence is this whole idea of reasoning. I can even imagine how people who used to think of it as like, I had to craft the perfect prompt. Now, enterprises who've learned from you can adopt this technology of reasoning and actually avoid that whole step entirely.
Exactly. You're spot on.
Thanks so much for teaching me, Cody. I always learn something every time.
It was great catching up, Rob. Thank you.